Hi guys, I'm just going to give a couple of more minutes just to see the rest of the people going to arrive. Welcome and thanks for coming. Got 2 more minutes till 2, so just wanted to know if you can put in the chat. I know some of you have done the exam already before, but if you just let me know if it's the first time you're sitting the exam or how many times you've sat it before. That would be great. Thank you, people. Hi guys, just for the people who've just come in, if you wouldn't mind just sending me a message in the private chat about if this is the first time you're sitting the exam or if it's the second or third time, just to get an idea. I know I've talked to some of you already, so I know some of you already done it before and some this is the first time. Great, thank you. Okay, so it's just come up to 2 o'clock now, so I'm going to just get started, and if anyone else joins, then that's great. So thank you all for coming, welcome. I'm really excited to introduce you to this webinar series that I've created. I'm sure some of you, when you signed up, have read what I've written, basically that I tried to do paper A before core training, and I studied for it on my own, and I thought I was studying really effectively and studying really well, but it can just be really hard when you're studying alone, and this is the kind of exam that people just tend to do on their own. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. It's not easy to get a group together, people are at different stages, and it can just be really difficult. So I sat the exam and then I didn't pass it, and I was really upset. And so basically I always used to use courses as a way to help me revise, and I found that there wasn't any. So that's why I've decided to create this course to kind of just create somewhere where people can feel supported and can go through the content and know what other people are kind of level is at and just feel a bit more ready and prepared. So here's the plan for session 1. So just an intro. So we're on that now for a few minutes, and then I've got some information about the examination. And then we'll do the first part of the course of today, which is on sociocultural, psychiatry and behavioural. And we'll have a break, then we'll continue with that. So just some reminders. So the group is designed to help you support in passing paper A. I will have questions at the end. There'll be some time hopefully at the end to ask some questions, and if I don't know the answer to them, then I'll get back to you. I'm planning to go through this just to cover everything, and we're going to cover all the main key points. And I do recommend, if you haven't printed a copy of the syllabus, I found that really helpful to have with you. And also obviously we're going to supplement, you're going to supplement your learning with questions later, and I will recommend what I used as well. So the next slide is actually, if you don't mind not sharing this with anyone, obviously I can't control if people take screenshots and things like that, but I'm just asking you if you don't mind keeping this private, because this is my my personal examination results from the June 2022 and the December 2022 paper. So I received the results in January 2023 for this one. And the reason I put this in is just to kind of give you guys a bit of an understanding. So the first time I sat it, I missed it by 0.8%. You can see I got 58.7%, and the paper pass mark was 59.5%. and it says fail, and that was really depressing. I'm sure you guys some of you have told me that you've had the same experience, and it's really demotivating and demoralizing because, you know, it's a really hard exam. You've already got into training and you kind of just want to get it out the way. You spent £500 on the exam, then probably loads more on other materials. So I can really relate to you guys in terms of that. So the reason I put this in there is because you can see that this isn't published on the MRCPsych website. This is why I'm sharing it with you. The mean score of passing candidates for each of the sections. So as you can see with the basic neurosciences, that was 61.8%, and you got 52.4% the first time. Then 70% actually did okay on that one. So this is the topic we're doing today, which is actually my best topic. So hopefully that will be useful for you. Got 71.4 on that. Then classification was quite high, 75.8. Then, as you can see, the rest of them. And then just comparing over to the December exam, so that was set at 65.3%, and I got 74.1%, which I was very happy with. And you can see again in the results, the mean scores are there. And behavioural science had got 84.6%. And I'm just telling you that because basically what I'm going to go through today is pretty much everything that I covered for that topic to get that score. So if you can basically learn everything that's in today's session, you're quite sure that you can get a good mark on that section of the exam. And I just put this slide in because I was a bit confused. So you can see in the previous slide that it says there was 481 candidates successful in the June exam, and that's a pass rate of 48.8%. And then again in the December exam, 422 people passed, which is 46.2%. So I basically assumed that the college was passing like a set number of people, but they've actually put on their thing that there is no predetermined number of candidates who pass or fail. Instead, candidates pass or fail according to their own performance and not how well they perform in relation to other candidates. So I found that quite surprising because I thought that, you know, there must be some reason why it's always around that 50% mark of pass and fail, but they say that that's not how it's calculated and it's just done on the scores. So that is just something to think about. And what we're going through today is behavioural science and sociocultural psychiatry. That makes up nearly 17% of the exam, which is 25 marks. And one thing that I really wanted to focus on with you guys throughout the next sort of 8 weeks before the exam is to really like not miss any of those smaller marks on the topics that are less heavy, one might say. People would sometimes miss out a bit of behavioural science and the human development because it says, you know, there's only 17%. But actually, if you can really maximise your scores on both of those, you're getting nearly 40% of the exam like sorted. And these are things that are much more tangible, I found, like especially if you've probably noticed that doing papers and things, it's much easier to understand the question in those sections because they aren't really like bizarre things like what receptor or like how does this G protein break down or like how many parts does it have. These are more like you can kind of recognize some of these. So what I'm hoping for is that if we really get 100% on this part, we can just really make it give us a good chance of getting a good score. So I'm just going to have a look in the private chat, see if anyone else has put in how many times they've sat the exam. So only, okay. Yeah, if you do have a chance, then definitely do just let me know, because it really helps to know where to kind of, I don't want to basically say things that you guys already know really well. But anyway, let's get started. So this is our first topic. As said, it's 25 marks out of 150. We're going to hopefully try and get all of those marks, and that's 16.67% of the total exam, and 25 bullet points in the syllabus if you have a syllabus with you. So let's start with the old classical conditioning. You guys probably all know this super well, but these are easy marks again. This is just a classic Pavlov's experiment with the dogs. and there's responses to stimuli. So animal or human associates stimulus with a significant event. So the food is the unconditioned stimulus, so it's got no prior meaning. Salivating is an unconditioned response because it's a natural occurring process. Then the bell ringing becomes a conditioned stimulus, and salivating after hearing the bell is a conditioned response. So it's whenever neutral stimuli associated with psychological significant events. And I always personally remember this because when I was like about 11, I ate a prawn sandwich and I was really sick. And basically now I can't ever think about eating prawns without thinking of that, but I have got over it. So we'll talk about how to get over it as well. And terminology, these are also things that come up, especially in the EMQs. Stimulus generalization. So that's basically like if you have a dog and you ring a bell and the bell sounds slightly different, but pretty much close enough to the original sound, you'll get the same response. And then stimulus discrimination is when the bell it's a bell, but it sounds quite different, like it's much more quiet or it's a different pitch, and so it doesn't actually produce a conditioned response. Extinction is if the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, is repeatedly presented without the food, then the response will disappear. But however, having said that, if it's not presented for some time after extinction and then it's presented again, so if you stop doing the bell with the food and you just do the bell and then you leave it and then you do the bell a while, then you will get some return to the conditioned response. And incubation is something where you basically, if you're scared of something and then you see it briefly, but you don't kind of address it, it can make the fear worse. So this also happens in phobias as well. So, you know, if you're scared of dogs and then you like cross the street every time you see a dog, your fear will probably increase. And this is just another concept again. So the higher order conditioning, I really like this example because I have a cat. So first of all, the sound of like the food tin causes an unconditioned response in the cat, which is the cat like, you know, salivates or maybe like runs to the door. And then it becomes, you start opening the door to that area and then the cat knows that is going to lead to the next thing. So that's higher order conditioning. So in the end, you just need to open the door to the cupboard, or you just need to open that squeaky door and you will get the response from the animal or human. So these are some of the negative terminologies. So aversive conditioning is when you pair an unwanted, unpleasant stimulus with unwanted behavior. So if you're trying to lose weight, you could like, I don't know why I thought of this example, but every time you open the fridge, you get sprayed in the face. This is a new thing that, you know, could be very popular. That would stop you from then wanting to open the fridge. So then you stop opening the fridge because you get sprayed, and then you stop eating food, and then you lose weight, hopefully. Counter conditioning is, again, I don't know why I thought of this very strange situation, which is when someone gives you a piece of chocolate every time you touch a dog, and eventually the fear response declines because you're counter conditioning, you're associating that negative stimulus or feared conditioned stimulus with a good thing. And you then start to enjoy it, so then you start touching the dog more, get loads of chocolate, and then get really fat, and then you have to install the fridge spray technique. Reciprocal inhibition. So this uses counter conditioning, and basically it was originally done where the idea was that you can't have a state of anxiety while you're having like a good thing. So like, for example, animals, they can't eat when they're anxious. So if you're then presenting food, and then that will take away the anxiety as well. So then that reduces the fear stimulus. Stimulus preparedness. So some stimuli are more prone to conditioning. So for example, as you know, spiders, snakes, anything like which is basically a bit got teeth or can damage you as a human being, you would then more likely to become averse to it. And then escape conditioning. So this is when the aversive situation is removed after response. Okay, so just checking the chat to see if anyone else. Okay, great, thank you everyone. So these are the time-related classical conditioning terminologies. So delay conditioning, again, these are very popular in EMQs. So it's really worthwhile just making some flashcards for yourself to remember these. So the bell is rang, and then the food comes, but the bell is still ringing. So this is the difference between delay and trace. So with delay, the bell is ringing for a while and then the food comes out, but the bell's still going. Whereas with trace is the bell rings and then there's a little bit of time and then the food comes out. Backwards conditionings is that the food comes out and then the bell rings. Simultaneous is the bells at the same time as the food. And there is this law of contiguity, which is that stimuli need to occur close together in time in order to be associated. So there's no point ringing the bell and then waiting like an hour and then putting the food out, because that won't give the correct classical conditioning response. And then temporal conditioning is something where basically every period of time the food is taken out, and then that will create this sensation of like the time period. So one way that I could think of this is when I was in quarantine, I actually had to stay in this like quarantine hotel because I went to New Zealand, and they would bring the food at like certain times in the day, and then basically me and my friend got used to that period of time, and then like we are, for some reason, like we wouldn't even know, but every time it became near that time, we'd be like, oh, like I'm like so hungry, I'm like, you know, getting like restless, and then the food would arrive. So it does actually happen in people. So operant conditioning, this is responses to a behavior rather than like a neutral stimulus. So for example, the animal will do something like press a pedal, or like you know, make a noise or something, and that will create a sequence where it becomes associated with a thing. These are primary and secondary reinforcers. So these can be used in any kind of classical conditioning, really, but I guess it's more popular in operant conditioning. The primary reinforcer for all of these is that instinctual desires. So these are natural things that all animals and humans have. So food and water and other things. Then secondary reinforcers are learnt reinforcers. So things like money, it's not a natural thing to desire that, but when you come to realize what the value of it, then you can use that as a reinforcer. And again, social approval is considered by some to be a secondary reinforcer. And then reinforcement and punishment. So positive reinforcement is, well done, here's a gold sticker. Negative reinforcement is when basically your dad or someone keeps shouting at you to clean your room, and eventually you do clean your room and they stop shouting at you, and that is negative reinforcement, because basically you're taking away the unpleasant thing, and that is the reward. Positive punishment is a parent shouting at the child, and negative punishment, because it's an active process, negative punishment is them taking something away. So other terminologies that we use are shaping. So this I like to think of as kind of maybe like learning to ride a bike, or getting a dog to like play fetch. Like you first of all start by going near the bike, then getting on the bike, and then like moving a bit forward, and then you get encouraged doing that, and it always moves forward, and you get reinforced by reward after each kind of close action towards that thing. So if the dog goes near the stick, then reward it, and if it then picks it up for a second, then that's another reward. Whereas chaining is you breaking down the task into different actions, and this can be moving forward or backward. So you can be getting reinforcement at each stage, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the correct order, but it's usually reinforced at the end of the chain. So I think people like to use the example of maybe the alphabet, but however that also should be learned in order, but you're meant to reinforce at the end of the chain. Habituation is a decrease in response to stimulus over time, and then if it's removed and reintroduced, the response will reappear at full strength, which is part of spontaneous recovery. Covert sensitization, sorry, I'm going to be speaking for ages, so using mental imagery. So I like to think of this as every time you're eating something fatty, then imagine like having a heart attack or your arteries clogging up, and that will basically try and reduce your propensity to do that thing. So I really recommend watching like YouTube videos on these tests. So because some of these are they're really hard to kind of remember. These are the frontal lobe, the things the frontal lobe does. So initiation, abstraction, problem solving and decision making, response inhibition and set shifting. They're kind of like initiation, like getting started on something, like words, like fluency, like thinking of words beginning with F or those kind of things. Abstraction is like metaphors, like similarities, or how tall is a bus, for example. And then problem solving and decision making, these are other tests that they use. Response inhibition and set shifting, there's loads of these. So like I watched videos on like Wisconsin's card sorting test, where they basically have to like split cards into different types, and then Stroop test as well. Yeah, so if you have time, I definitely recommend just kind of like typing the name into YouTube and just watching it, because that's the only way I managed to remember what they were, apart from flashcards. Okay, so here we have the reinforcement schedules. It's also a very popular question. I think I got that in both my exams. So fixed interval is at every given point of time, the reinforcement occurs. So you get paid on the last Thursday or Friday of every month. That's a fixed interval. Variable interval. So I thought of a few different things. So like random gifts. So you don't know when they're going to happen. Pop quiz, like a random quiz where you're not prepared for it. Mobile speed cameras, so not the ones that are always there, like the yellow ones, but the ones where the police have the van. That's a variable interval, so you don't know when it's going to happen, and it's unpredictable time interval. Also praise. This is also why praise is really good. Like you don't know when it's going to happen, then someone says, "Oh, well done," then you know that is a good feeling. Fixed ratio is something like buying 10 cups of coffee, getting one free. So after every certain number of responses, there's a predictable reinforcement. And then variable ratio, which is most resistant to extinction, is gambling, for example, which is basically there's a reinforcement after unpredictable number of responses. Like you keep pressing the thing, and then you get the reward. I think this is also what they propose as why TikTok and Instagram Reels and kind of Facebook are addictive as well, because you know you scroll and you see maybe 10 reels or 10 videos, and then there's one that's like really good, and then like you'll watch 2, and then there'll be one more that's really good, and that's why it's part of addiction, kind of. And then random is just no pattern. Memory. So I found this topic really hard because there's a lot in there. So we'll just go through this, but you know, if there's any questions at the end, then like we can try and go through that. So memory is divided into sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So sensory memory is your haptic, echoic, and iconic. So haptic is your touch memory, echoic is auditory, iconic is like visuals, and we're going to talk in a minute about the visuospatial sketchpad and what that means. So basically you can kind of remember things for a second, and then that goes into the short-term visual memory. The way I remember this is like, you know, when you turn the light off in your room, but you can still kind of see where everything is because you kind of remember it like for a second. You don't need the light on, you should kind of remember it. That's kind of part of visuospatial sketchpad. And then short-term memory, working memory is part of that. And then long-term memory, you've got those two types, and we'll go through those now. So this is also a model that comes up, which is the working memory model. Basically, the central executive kind of divides attention between these things. You know, the visuospatial sketchpad, which is getting information like visually, and that helps you work out things like how far a ball is traveling towards you, and that so that you can kind of work it out and what to do. And then the episodic buffer is between, kind of gives you time to work that out. And the phonological loop is when basically you kind of hear and you remember like for about 2 to 3 seconds, and you can kind of loop that round to remember it. I like to think of this as when you're in the shop and then you keep saying the same things to yourself to remember to buy them, like tuna, beans, cheese, and then you keep repeating it because you want to remember what it is. I mean, the reason that works is because of the phonological loop, because you kind of keep repeating it and you can remember that in your mind. So the two types of declarative memory, which are episodic and semantic. So these are the ones, so the way I remember this is that you declare the information, like it's something that you can consciously say out loud. So one is episodic, like personal experiences and events, and that storage happens really rapidly. Like you can remember what happened to you in December or 3 years ago. And then the other one is semantic. So these are facts and concepts, and they occur, this occurs slowly over time, which is why we have to study and keep repeating studying, because this is harder to keep. But these are both declarative types. So there's only two types. You declare the information that you know about yourself and that you know about the world. And then this is the non-declarative or implied memory. So this is in your mind, in your memory, but you can't consciously retrieve it as such. So you've got procedural memory, so riding a bike or driving a car. These involve your basal ganglia and cerebellum, and they're quite hard to explain as well. You can't really explain like how to ride a bike. It's kind of just something you know, like you can't consciously sort of do it. Well, you do it, but you don't consciously do it. Associative memory is association with other information, which is involved in classical and operant conditioning. This includes things like when you're in the same kind of emotional state as remembering something before. So, for example, when you're in a certain state, you kind of have a better association with times that you were in that state previously. So, like when you're sad, you remember more memories from when you were also sad in the past. And then non-associative memory is newly learned behavior through repeated exposure to an isolated stimulus. I kind of find this concept hard to describe, really. I couldn't really think of any examples because I feel like stimuli generally are not isolated, but maybe just learn that bit. And then priming, I like to use the example of Darren Brown. If you guys have watched him, he's like a magician kind of, but he basically like primes people. So he'll like show them like a quick picture, or like he'll put like words, and then later on people will be like primed to answer that. So for example, if you talk about balls or like games, and then like someone asks you like what's your favorite game, you might say like, oh, tennis, because you're thinking of that. These are the seven sins of memory. So these are transient, so memory becomes less accessible with time, which makes sense. Absent-mindedness, which is lapses of attention. Blocking, which is you can't access, like tip of the tongue, kind of forgot a word, you can't remember it. It's like right there, but you can't remember it. Suggestibility, so incorporating misinformation into memory. Someone says, oh, weren't you there that day? And you say, actually, I think maybe I was, but you weren't. And then bias, like distortions due to current beliefs and situation. Persistence, this happens in PTSD as well. And then misattribution, so false memory of something that hasn't actually happened, or misattributing memory to incorrect source. These are two laws that come up sometimes. Ribot's law, which is that, maybe it's Ribot, I don't know if you're French or something. Recent memory is more likely to be lost than remote memory, so that's quite normal, like for example in Alzheimer's. And then Jost's law, which is that if two memories are of the same strength but different ages, the older one will decay more slowly than the younger one. Excuse me. So the amnesias, you've got anterograde amnesia, which is that you can't create new memories, and there's damage to the hippocampus usually. And the reason I put a picture of a hippo and a seahorse is because apparently the Latin hippocampus means seahorse, but I didn't really know that before. But I've just put hippo as well to help you remember. And then retrograde is loss of old memories, so usually traumatic insult or head injury. And episodic is affected more than semantic. So this is associated with damage to hippocampus as well. Sorry, excuse me. I had a really bad cold recently. Okay, I'll have some water. And thanks to some of you who've also put some more things in the chat. So these are the other types of amnesia. Source amnesia, which is where you can't remember where you found out the information, but you can remember the information still. And then psychogenic or dissociative amnesia, which is a period of time which can be lost. It can also be situation specific. So people get this sometimes, like if they're involved at a scene of a crime and then they just can't remember anything about that situation. Global psychogenic amnesia, which is sudden loss of whole past or fugue state, which can also be focal with anterograde sparing. So with the fugue state, people generally forget like the whole past and the whole self. And this is a psychogenic amnesia. Semantic amnesia is a problem with language use and acquisition. And then transient global amnesia is usually over 50s, and they tend to get their memory back after about 24 hours. And these people often come into A&E as well. Flashbulb memory is where people remember like an important event. For example, I'm sure you guys can all remember where you were for finding out about 9/11. So those are kind of the situations that people refer to. These are some more terms that are often used again in EMQs. So encoding and registration, storage and retention. And then again, a very, very popular question is the short-term memory capacity being 7 plus or minus 2 items. And then, as we said before, working memory refers to memory that temporarily processes information, which involves phonological loop and the visuospatial sketchpad. And then we've got retrieval collection and primacy and recency effects, which are basically when someone tells you a list of items, you will tend to remember the first and last items of the list most easily. Oh God, I think this is actually probably one of the hardest bits of this topic. I don't know if you guys agree. Do send a message in the chat about what you think about this, but I couldn't think of any good way to remember these apart from literally just writing it on flashcards. I mean, you can actually have a look and see what the tests are themselves. So, for example, like the Ray Osterreich complex figure test, they basically get a picture and then ask the person to kind of remember it and then repeat it after a certain amount of time. And I suppose if you do understand what the test looks like, it can help you remember what it is, but there really wasn't an easy way to just remember these. These are just rote learning. I'm just writing it out over and over again. And these are divided into two types. I think this is a bit more manageable, really, because you've got the projective personality tests. So these are things analysing personality. So the famous Rorschach ink blot, which is those splodges that you've seen, and people asked to see what they sort of see. And there's a lot of free association and kind of more abstract and analysis of personality compared with the objective personality tests, which kind of look at specific amounts of certain traits, for example. So these are quite straightforward to remember. Oh, so here we have our classic structural theory. This is just one of the basic things that we are expected to know. And the way I like to think of it is the superego is the parent. This is very basic, just for exam memory. The superego is the parent, and the id is like your inner child, I suppose, and your ego is like what you present to the world. So your superego's constantly analyzing you, is in internalized value of maybe of a main character, like your parent, like your mom or dad or both. And it kind of acts as your conscience. So we'll say like, oh, are you sure you should do that? I don't think we should do that. And your id is like, oh, I want to do that, you know, let's steal it. And the questions mainly relate to things like differences between the superego and the id in terms of what they have. Like the id, they'll say, you know, the sense of time, there's no sense of time, is based on the pleasure principle. There's primary process thinking. So it's very, very simple. It's a simplified self. And then the superego, obviously, as mentioned, is kind of like the parental role. And then the id, the ego, is a combination of the two, where it modifies the drives, saying, yes, you are hungry, you do want to eat that, but, you know, you can't just steal the last eclair off the plate. You have to let other people take it. If nobody wants it, then you can take it. And that kind of is the way that you present yourself to the world. And the topographical model of the mind as well. So this is just based, it's a very simplified version. The part of the mind that is aware, which is your conscious, the pre-conscious, which is information that is known and can be brought into consciousness. So these are things that you can actually bring out and you can talk about or you can acknowledge. And then the unconscious, Freud always said, was outside of conscious awareness and was aimed at wish fulfillment, again, governed by the pleasure principle. So there's a lot of id inside the unconscious, and it's irrational, and it allows the existence of contradictions as well. So, for example, famous things like, wanting to, like in the Oedipus complex, wanting to have a relationship with the opposite gender parent, like these kind of things, like are in the unconscious because, rationally speaking, they're not really possible. So Gestalt psychology is a type of, is kind of like an ideology, and the best way to think of it is kind of part of structuralism. So they break down thoughts into basic components and then create laws about how they're connected, and they do this for many kind of aspects of everything, like in the psyche, within thinking, and other things as well. So other Gestalt psychologists, so Wertheimer, he came up with this 5 phenomenon, which is, I put a picture of Tarzan. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's a bit in Tarzan where he spins the picture, and it's like lots of series of images, and that becomes like a moving picture, and that's the 5 phenomenon. And then these people as well, Kafka, Kohler, Rubin, who is famous for Rubin's vase, which is on the right. These are the Gestalt laws of perceptual organization. So you've probably seen the pictures where it's like dots and then how they're joined together and those kind of things. So this is those, and I just remember this by thinking SSPPCCC. It's not really a great mnemonic, but it kind of helps you remember. And the question sometimes says, which of these is not a law of perceptual organization from the Gestalt perspective, for example. So you can think of it as, symmetry, similarity, proximity, continuity, closure, and common fate. And they're quite straightforward if you look at the pictures, but basically it's a way that they propose that the mind likes to look at information. This is Maslow. I think he looks pretty happy. So he's obviously fulfilled all of his D needs and also his B needs. The D needs are the deficiency needs, which basically mean that you have to complete all of those needs before you can reach your full potential. So the first 4 levels until you get to self-actualization, and that is the B need, which is being need. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Then later in his life, Maslow obviously had developed his original model and then added a few more things to it. So he added like the aesthetic needs, transcendence, cognitive needs, and made an 8-stage model. But usually a lot of the questions are focused on the original model. This is Melanie Klein. She was famous for the paranoid schizoid position, where the mind divides the world into good and bad, and is characterized by the defense mechanism of splitting. Sorry, excuse me. Oh my God. And then later, after splitting happens, the depressive position can be taken, where someone can accept that something is good and bad, and that is known as ambivalence. So these are the components of language. So semantics, which is the meaning of the language, syntax, which is a sentence structure, morphology is part of that as well. Later, that's not mentioned in there. Phonology, which is the organization of speech sound, and phonetics, as well as pragmatics, so the understanding and construct of the words and meaning. Incentive salience is a concept where basically you can want something which you don't necessarily like. So, for example, you may crave like a drug or, for example, cocaine, but you may not actually like it, but it's part of the mesolimbic dopamine system. So that is what causes that effect. And there's also the state-dependent amplification of incentive salience. Sorry. And basically, what this is when you've started taking a drug, for example, people find it very difficult to stop once they've just started. So the desire is amplified by a state that heightens dopamine. The diathesis stress model, this is another model which I've just put in here because some of these concepts don't really fit easily into any of the other sections, but basically nature and nurture both contribute to people's behavior, and some people have a predisposition to certain illness, and environmental stress can trigger this in vulnerable people. And the intervention causation fallacy is that if you give someone an antidepressant, for example, if they then recover, it doesn't necessarily mean that they had depression, and a cure does not prove the cause. Okay. So this is one of the main sections of the first part of the syllabus, which is personality. And personality actually comes across in lots of different places within the syllabus, so it can be really hard to just focus in on one place. But temperament is one theory that was developed by Thomas and Chess, where they said that the innate qualities of personality are a result of genetics, and character is from learned experiences. So they assessed children on 9 traits, and then they worked out that these children fell into one of 3 groups: easy child, difficult child, or slow to warm up child. And the questions generally center around the percentages. So just learn that 40%, 10%, and 15%. And then the goodness of it is how well the temperament matches their environment. For example, some children are really like active and they don't fit in well in like a classroom situation. They would do better in more like an active environment. Okay, so I made this table about the theories of emotion because this is again something that comes up a lot and is really hard to remember. So, so to start with, the first one is the James Lange theory, and basically, just imagine there's a dog called James, and you see this dog called James, and heart is racing, and your mind interprets your heart racing as fear. So that's the James Lange theory, which is that the stimulus for emotion arises from physical sensations. So the physical sensation first from the dog, and then the mind says, oh, you're scared. And then the cannon-barred theory, I think of this as a cannon. So the cannon shoots off, and that basically is that there's a simultaneous response. So this proposes that the stimulus for emotion arises simultaneously in body and mind. So everything happens at the same time. So when you're scared, your mind goes, I'm scared, and your body's like, I'm scared as well. So that's a cannon, the cannon-barred theory. Singer-Schlachter theory is a 2-factor theory. So basically, what they are suggesting in this is that there is a context to what the emotion is. So, for example, your heart is racing and you're about to have the exam, or you're about to jump off parachute off a plane, then you label it as fear. But if your heart is racing and you're at the altar and you're about to get married, you label that as excited because your mind has appraised that and decided. So that's the Singer-Schlachter theory. And I remember that by thinking of singing, at the wedding, like everyone's really happy. So you're singing and you're enjoying yourself, and that is how you can remember it. And the last one is the Lazarus theory. So thought is required before an emotion occurs. For example, you see a snake and you imagine it's going to bite you. So you have to think of the thought of what might happen before you can feel afraid. And the stimulus for emotion arises from the mind. And the way I remember this is also a bit rogue, but Lazarus, he was raised from the dead. So I always think like he comes up first, like your thoughts first, and then you get the emotion. And yes, it's not a great way, but I feel that it is some way to remember it. So those are the 4 very important key theories of emotion that are usually asked. These are just some psychological treatments that are popular. So behavioural activation therapy for depression usually requires about 12 to 24 sessions, and is focused around getting people to do things that they've been avoiding, like maybe going to the supermarket or meeting friends, that kind of thing. Then flooding is a treatment for phobia, which you probably know is just extremely just show them the thing. And then desensitization, which is more like a gradual exposure, and patients generally prefer this because sometimes with flooding, people leave the situation before the fear response is extinguished, and that can actually worsen the phobia in the long term. These are the 3 models of attention. So Broadbent's filter model, Treisman's attenuation theory, and the Deutsch and Deutsch late stage model. With Broadbent's filter model, I remember it because he's said that left and right ear work independently, which I find quite hard to really believe. But this is an early selection model, and what it's saying is that input is filtered before it's analysed for meaning. But it doesn't explain the cocktail phenomenon, which is when someone says your name at a party when there's loads of people there and it's very busy. You still hear your own name because you can remember it. So that doesn't explain that one. It's the early selection model. The second one is Treisman's attenuation theory, which is a leaky filter model, which is intermediate selection. So basically this says that there's a 2-stage filter mechanism and your brain allows some things through. So like a dictionary unit, so like there's a few words that are primed for, like maybe your name, or like maybe like the street you live on, or like your job, like you may hear those more easily, but that is kind of how your attention is. And then the Deutsch and Deutsch late stage model is that basically input is analysed for meaning before the filtering occurs. So the meaning process and the selection happens after. So your brain is literally analysing the meaning of everything you're hearing, and then you're selecting what you want to keep. To be honest, I don't really understand how any of these could really explain how attention works, but these are the 3 theories. So if you just remember that Broadbent has the left and the right ear working independently, Treisman has got this dictionary unit, and Deutsch late stage is that everything meaning is processed all together and then selection happens after. Cognitive dissonance is a concept where which leads to change of behaviors, attitudes, belief. And the famous one is like with cigarette smoking. So people who smoke kind of know that it's not good for them, but they will have cognitive dissonance about certain things. So they'll say, actually, you know what, I live a really healthy life otherwise, and smoking is fine. So they maybe minimize the importance, or they'll say, oh, there's some studies that said that smoking is actually not that bad for you. So maybe gain information, or they might change their attitude and say, actually, I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to vape instead. So there's this inner drive for harmony between attitudes, beliefs, and behavior. So the person wants to basically have everything all in line with each other. Other ones to know about are just see. Okay, good, we're on time. Practice effect. So this is a really stupid one because basically it's saying if past experience of a test increases a score if the interval between 2 tests is short, which is basically saying practicing, which is basically a concept that we all know. So I don't really know, but anyway, that is in the syllabus. So practice effect. Pre-max principle. I like this one. This is grandma effect, where high probability behaviors can be used to reinforce low probability. So, for example, you can have a dessert, or you can eat dessert if you eat your vegetables, or you can go out and play if you do your homework. Those are the famous ones that are kind of remembered. The Sally-Ann test is also a very well-known psychological theory where they had children, they had some children, and they put like a marble in the box, and they said, this marble's in this box. And then they got like another child, and they would say, where would this other child look for the marble? And they'd say in the box. But then while the other child wasn't there, they would put the marble somewhere else. And some children would know like that the child is then going to look in the wrong place. And this is the theory of mind, which is you can understand what someone else is thinking about where the marble is. And they've noticed that in children with autism, for example, that they they were less able to understand theory of mind, and they would suggest the wrong place. So there's actually, if you type in Sally Ann test on YouTube, you can actually watch the whole test, which is quite interesting. Thorndike's law of effect. So actions with more pleasurable responses are strengthened, and actions which are uncomfortable are less common. And again, this does make sense. So things that make you feel good, you're more likely to repeat, and those that don't, you're less likely to repeat. Personality. So this is trait theory by Alport. And what he suggests is that there are 3 levels of kind of traits in personality. So level 1 is the cardinal trait, and this is not everybody has a cardinal trait, but it's like a very, very strong trait. And if you know someone and they've got like this really, really strong trait, like most people would know what it is about that person. So I was thinking that maybe there's somebody who's like really, really like I don't know, like very, very extroverted, and like that's their most classic trait, and that rules their personality. So everything about them is like very sociable, they're outgoing, they speak a lot, they're very loud, and that will be like well known about them. Like when you say, oh, what this person, they say, oh, they're really like, they're such a loud person. This is kind of how I remember it. And then central traits are kind of easily detected characteristics with a person, and all people have a certain number of these. So usually about 5 to 10. So these are other traits, like conscientiousness or like generosity, those kind of things. So people will all have some of these. And then secondary traits are less evident and only appear in certain situations. So I think these are things that are like situation specific, like maybe under anger they behave a certain way, or in sadness or in isolation, those kind of things. And this is part of trait theory. And then we have the primary emotions by Ekman from 1972, and these are the 6 basic emotions that are biologically universal to all humans that have been discovered, I suppose, by him. And these are happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. And basically postulated that regardless of kind of culture and population or where the person lives or their background, these 6 emotions will all be present and recognizable, and that these were kind of evolutionarily developed in order for humans to communicate with each other through expression, not necessarily through language, or even like pre-linguistically was proposed. And he did add some more in 1990, but usually questions are related to those 6 original ones. So we have a few minutes now till 3 just to answer any questions. If anyone wants to put any questions in the chat. So that was a whiz through the first section of the of sociocultural society, psychiatry, can't even say it. So yeah, if there's any questions on that, because I know it's quite heavy, and usually people find some of the things like the working memory model or just remembering the parts of the memory quite difficult to do. And if there's not any, okay, so there's just some comments, not so many questions actually. So thank you for the compliment. Fine. In that case, we can just get started on the next section and then take the break at 3 as planned anyway. So this is social psychology. So these are Thurston's 7 primary abilities, and basically he proposed that everybody has some degree of these abilities, and that's what makes up their intelligence level. So some people will be very, very good at number facility or associative memory, but less good at word fluency. But if you're good at all of these, then you're supposedly meant to have a very high IQ. And again, I would just say I put these on a flashcard, and just remembered them in that way, because this does come up actually. So word fluency, verbal comprehension, spatial visualization, number facility, associative memory and reasoning, and perceptual speed. This is a concept called groupthink, which is basically within a group of people, there's a desire for conformity, which is proposed to be an evolutionary thing when people lived in more primitive circumstances. There was a desire that they were not ostracized from society, because that would be negative for their survival potentially. So people will want to survive in the group, and so there's a desire for conformity. But in the current day and age, that is actually not that beneficial, because in these groups, people, in order to conform and to stay within the group and to keep everyone happy, there's a concept called groupthink, where everybody kind of just thinks in the same way, and nobody really challenges opinions or ideas. So you may notice, for example, like I've noticed before, in like an MDT, for example, people will all be saying something very weird, like, "Oh yeah, we should not see this patient," and everyone's like, "Yeah, we shouldn't." And it kind of is a bit of a situation where everyone's thinking the same way. No one's really challenging um, the like meaning or the reason why that this has happened. And you can almost think of, like, in Nazi Germany, for example, there was collective groupthink, in a sense, where people were all behind these ideas, nobody challenged them, and then everybody kind of accidentally managed to get into this mindset, which was really, really negative for society. But some of the criteria that are important for this is that the group must be isolated from outside influences. Group loyalty prevents raising controversial issues. There's loss of individual creativity and independent thinking. There's this illusion of invulnerability, which is that nothing can go wrong and nobody can, be held to account for anything. And there's usually like a high level of pressure to make a decision. There's a lack of impartial leader. There's a belief that the group is very moral, so people really believe in the group. The stereotype groups that are not part of the like the understanding of the same group, like for example, they'll just make fun of other people's groups or thinking, and they assume people who are silent within the group are agreeing, and they also put pressure on people who disagree. It's kind of like a cultish type of behavior as well. So what reduces groupthink? Leaders should allow members to challenge ideas and object. Members should be able to talk with people outside the group, because this will introduce kind of alternative thinking. Outside experts should be invited to attend meetings. Avoid expressing opinions about the preferred outcome, and assigning a devil's advocate to all meetings to challenge ideas. These are some of the things that, like for example, when a question may ask which of these reduces groupthink, and it usually is quite an obvious one, because what you're trying to do is say, like, what of these things is making the group more reasonable. So like other people's ideas, other people's input is going to be more helpful. And then along with that comes group shift and de-individuation. So group shift is basically part of groupthink, where people's viewpoints become shifted to a more risky and kind of off-center decision making, because they feel more safe within the group and they feel like they're able to take more risks. And then de-individuation is loss of self-awareness in groups, for example, in crowds or mobs, but also good things like when people are in groups, they tend to donate more. So I think we'll just stop there for the 10-minute break. So it's 2:57, so should we come back at 3:07? Okay. And if there's any questions, put them in the chat. Hi guys. There's still a few minutes, about 5 minutes, but anyway, I've just taken my inhaler, so hopefully I'll stop coughing now. Yeah, there's just a couple of questions in the chat which I'll answer at the end, or we just have a few minutes now to talk through. I'll answer those at the end. Hey guys, yeah, so just a couple of people were asking about replays. So you'll have access to the replays of this. You can watch it again until the exam. So all of the sessions will be recorded and a link will be sent straight after the webinar is finished. So as said, I did take my inhaler just now, so hopefully I will stop coughing. And yeah, we can just continue in just a minute. It's 15:06, so we've just got one more minute to as part of our break. So okay, so coming back to, so we've done this bit now, the group shift and group think and all that. See, I think some of these are quite I'd say like it's just like a lot of bits and pieces in this section of the syllabus, kind of like random things. So in this next section, there's going to be like a lot of random theories and concepts that crop up, which don't necessarily fit in anywhere. So for example, this next one, This is the Good-Johnson suggestibility scale. So this tests how suggestible someone is. So you basically tell the person the story and you ask them to remember it. And then afterwards you ask them questions like, oh, what time was the person going to the bank? And then they answer questions based on what they remember. And then at the end of this this situation, this experiment also, they would tell them that, oh, you've done really badly, like you've forgotten all of the story, that's actually not what happened. And then the degree to which they change their answers or change what they think they remembered tells you how suggestible that person is. So this suggestibility score is calculated, and this is called the Good-Johnson suggestibility scale. Cognitive biases, so the halo effect. This is where somebody, like a good-looking person, is seen as more intelligent or better or more generous or more clever, funny, whatever. This also comes up in questions as the opposite, so like the devil effect or like the reverse halo effect. And this can be seen in things like with police officers in like, for example, in America, when they see someone who fits a certain like criteria or description, they would say like they assume that that person is doing something negative when maybe they're not, and that is like the reverse halo effect. Hawthorne effect is when somebody changes their behavior if they're being watched. So if someone watching you washing your hands, you are suddenly like very, very careful about how carefully you're washing your hands. And that's the Hawthorne effect. Bion's group dynamics. Bion, this is him in the corner. He came up with this theory about groups, people in groups. So there's two types. There's a working group, which is when everything is going well, people are working towards the aim and it's kind of functioning fine. And there's basic assumption group, which is basically like a non-functioning group, like a non-working group. So basically whatever goal they have in mind, it's not getting done because of some reason. And the three types of basic assumption groups, he's basically postulated that they act out these primitive fantasies which stop things getting done. And these three things are, first of all, the dependency group, which is when they turn towards a leader to protect them from their own anxiety. So they may like choose a leader, or someone may self-elect, someone may naturally with leadership skills become kind of chosen for that. And that group kind of depends everything on their leader. And this is not really useful for group dynamics. Fight flight group acts as if there's an enemy either within the group or externally. And their focus all becomes on like getting rid of this enemy, or like trying to sort something out, or being against another group. And this obviously also takes away from the main aim of the group. And lastly, pairing. The group acts as if the answer is in the pairing of two members, friendly or hostile, which I find this interesting because I can't imagine how, I mean, I've not seen a group where this has been. I mean, the other ones you can kind of imagine, like, in teaching or in like group projects, but pairing is something that I find a bit odd. So they're saying that essentially if two people in the team, in the group, get together, this will suddenly be the answer to making the group work. But these are Bion's group dynamics. Attribution theory. These are quite interesting concepts, actually. So fundamental attribution error is basically when somebody overvalues another person's disposition. So when you see someone who's late, you assume that they're just a late person. You don't think, oh, maybe they were stuck in traffic. And this goes with the actor-observer bias. So when it happens to yourself, like when you're late, you say, I'm late because of traffic and not because of my behavior. And you undervalue your own disposition. But then you also then you overvalue other people. So you say other people are late because they're disorganized. So the difference between fundamental attribution error and actor-observer bias is that fundamental attribution error is purely focused on other people Whereas actor observer bias, yourself is in the theory. So I'm late because of traffic. Other people are late because they're disorganized. So that is the key difference between those two. And then correspondence bias is that you then take it a step further than the fundamental attribution error. So basically you're saying that person is late, they're a late person, and that is their personality. So you're saying that it's actually like an innate characteristic within that person, which is quite extreme. So the difference between fundamental attribution error and correspondence bias is that you've taken it a step further and then assigned that to their personality. You're not saying that they're just like a late person, you're saying that that is a key part of who they are. So then self-serving bias. So this is when you attribute your own success to yourself and attribute failure to outward circumstance. And the example I like is, so you say, I won this match, this tennis match, because I'm a great athlete. And then you lost the match. You say, oh, the referee was unfair to me, for example. So this would be self-serving bias. And then hostile attribution bias. I feel like everybody has experienced this when like you go into a room and like people are whispering and you kind of assume that they're talking about you, even though it's really unlikely. And also they probably don't even know you or anything like that. But this is the natural human assumption that ambiguous behavior of others is actually interpreted as hostile. And potentially this could be like an evolutionary thing, which is, you know, self-protection or protection of the group. And then false consensus effect is an assumption that everybody else thinks in the same way that you yourself think. So people assume that other people hold the same opinions as them, whereas this is actually generally not always true. These are the theories on aggression. So this is a very busy slide, and I kind of just put this together because it can be hard to categorize like what these theories actually even are. So there's the five main ones that are mentioned in the syllabus. So psychodynamic theory of aggression, which is by Freud. And this postulates that aggression is caused by the primary instinct thanatos, which is basically the death instinct. So it's the opposite of eros, which is kind of like the life instinct, if you will. So thanatos is like the death drive. And in his theory, Freud says that the like thanatos causes us to act aggressively to the environment so that we stop ourselves from basically killing ourselves or destroying ourselves. And he uses this term catharsis, which is the discharge of that energy. And he has this hydraulic model of the mind, which is like the mind is like a pressure cooker and it like builds up steam, and like every so often you just have to let off steam by doing things like boxing or like exercise or like, you know, doing something aggressive to the environment so that you remove some of that energy. So that's Freud's psychodynamic theory using thanatos. The sociobiological theory by Lorenz. So he studied bird behavior, and his theory is that aggression is an instinctive thing and it occurs in response to biological stimuli. And this is basically just an evolutionary thing. It's not like, it hasn't got like a moral basis to it. There's no kind of like feelings related to it. It's just an animal kingdom selecting strong genes, survival of the fittest, follows predictable rules necessary for survival. That's how animals survive, to, you know, kill each other if they need food or, you know, fight off a predator. And that's just biological. So that's Lorenz. Then cognitive neo-association, which is by Berkowitz. So he developed this based on the frustration aggression hypothesis from Dollard. And what he says is that like adverse conditions cause a negative affect. So like say you're cold and you're tired and you're hungry and someone's trying to take your parking space and you're trying to get in to park at the restaurant, and you're tired and you're really not having it, that causes fight. That kind of adverse situation causes fight or flight tendencies, and basically this causes you to act in an aggressive way, or someone to act in an aggressive way. And also part of this theory is that the aggressive thoughts and emotions and behavior are all linked together, and so they kind of come up as one. So for example, you know, you were cold and hungry and you had to fight for food, and then that feeling comes up again, and that aggression comes in because of that. So it's what Berkowitz's theory is about, which is cognitive neo-association. Then social learning by Bandura is so there was an experiment where children observed like this doll being like treated aggressively, and then they learned how to do that. And basically it's observational learning. There's also this part of it which is reciprocal determinism, which is that people's behavior is influenced by their environment, and their behavior influences their environment as well. So basically the social learning theory of aggression is that we learn it from each other, and it's like kind of a learned thing. It's not necessarily an innate thing. And Rotter's social learning theory relates personality to a person's chance of responding aggressively to a situation. And this can be in relation to like nature nurture things, so how they've been brought up, but also like their innate inherited characteristics. And that's Rotter's social learning theory. And then the last one is the general aggression model by Anderson and Bushman, which combines the social, cognitive, developmental, and biological. So it kind of combines a bit of all of those and says, you know, all of these are valid. Maybe they all play. So those are just the 5, and hopefully that is a good way to remember them. The next is Grief Theory by Bowlby, and this actually came up in my December exam. The question was who did this grief theory, because I have another slide, but the other grief theory, which is the Kubler-Ross model, is different from this. So there's 2 main grief theories that are relevant for the paper A. With Bowlby's theory, he's got 4 stages of grief. So it starts with numbness or shock numbness, which is like disbelief, and that's a few days after like the event, so bereavement, for example. Then yearning, which is a few weeks generally. Disorganization and despair, several months, which includes acceptance. And then reorganization, which is resolution, occurs in 1 to 2 years. And again, like the same in both of the grief theories, there's no specified time period for each stage, but this is a typical course, and people can go back and forth from one stage to another. So grief theory, which is Kubler-Ross, which is DABDA as the mnemonic, so denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Again, any amount of time, and also can move in any order, but typically this is what is suggested as the order. Yeah, so just to be aware that Bowlby, even though he's famous for attachment, also had this grief theory, and that did actually come up for me. So distinguishing normal grief from major depression. So many people meet the criteria for major depression in the first year following bereavement, but this usually resolves within 6 months. But then the features that distinguish normal grief, like after bereavement, from major depression are that they have generalized guilt, which is not just related to the person. So they're not feeling like guilty that they didn't look after that person enough, or whatever. They're feeling generally guilty. They're having general thoughts of death, not just that person's death. So thinking about their own death, death of others, death as a concept, you know, dying. Worthlessness, which is key because that's not necessarily part of normal bereavement grief. And then hallucinations that are not about the person who has died. So hallucinations relating to the person who has died are common and accepted as part of normal grief, but not ones that are unrelated. Prolonged functional impairment and psychomotor retardation, which is obviously a person is moving slowly, talking slowly, doing everything slowly, which is part of major depression and not necessarily part of a grief reaction. Abnormal grief, so the inhibited aspect of abnormal grief is They have no grief symptoms at any stage. It's completely repressed/suppressed, and there's no reaction at all. Delayed is that they avoid the symptoms within 2 weeks of loss, but then they have the reaction after. Prolonged is that they have grief-related symptoms 6 months after loss, and it continues after that. So up to 6 months, any kind of behavior, is acceptable for someone who has had a loss or bereavement. But after 6 months, it's considered to be prolonged. French and Raven in 1959 put a French flag and a raven. So maybe that will trigger your memories for this power theory. So they developed this 5-base power theory, which is the ones in blue. I think this is interesting because so legitimate power, which is held by an individual and an organization. I like to think of this just as an NHS employee, like one of us, like a doctor. We have some power as an individual within this organization. Then referent power is somebody who's got charisma, who's charming, who people naturally kind of like admire them. They have some kind of referent power, which is interesting because it's kind of almost personality based. It's not necessarily something that they've done or that they do. Expert power, I think of someone like a consultant or like a professor. They've got specialist skills and knowledge, and that is valid. They've got expert power. Reward power, think of medical staffing. They can grant your leave and approve your leave, or help you find a locum to cover, and they can reward you. So they have a power, and that influences you maybe to treat them nicely. Coercive power, again, this could also be medical staffing, but this could be anybody that can influence negatively or punish someone. And these are 3 other power theories. So outcome power held by someone who can make changes. That could be anyone in like the country who votes. Social power is just someone who can influence others' thoughts and opinions. And then counter power, which is held by the oppressed to counterbalance the elite, which is basically like the minority, the power of the minority to, oppose the elite. Again, I'm not really sure how, how that really works because, but that is one of them on there. So now we're moving on to the social science and sociocultural psychiatry a bit more. So these are things like related to occupation, related to social class. So we'll start by talking about these vulnerability factors of depression in women. So they found that these are the factors that can influence depression in women. So having 3 or more children under 14 at home, not having a partner to be able to talk to or support them, not having a job, and also having lost their mother before 11 years old. I feel like these are all quite difficult things in their own right, but these are part of the vulnerability factors. Multiculturalism, so again, a quite common topic for some reason in the exam. So plural societies, which is lots of different cultural ethnic groups living together within a shared political and social framework. So I feel like London is quite like that. Acculturation, which is a dual process of cultural and psychological change with 2 or more cultural groups and their members. So this is, again, in like any city, there's 2 or more cultural groups and they kind of merging. There's acculturation. And maybe not as much kind of like political and social framework with acculturation, is more just the acceptance of different ideas and cultures. Melting pot, so a new form of dominant culture emerges from assimilating. So a heterogeneous society becomes more homogeneous. And this is basically like, if you can imagine like people, like for example, the diaspora, like immigrants who've come to, for example, London, and they kind of part of normal mainstream London culture now. And that's created this new London culture, which is they've assimilated into it. So when you go to London, you expect to see like people from different backgrounds, and that's kind of like the dominant culture now. It would be weird if there was like only one type of person there. Laissez-faire is French for to leave something alone or to like have loose reins, basically, which is basically multiculturalism without trying. So this is when groups form and they create their own subculture or multicultural area without any particular like purpose. So for example, Chinatown or Southall, those would be like laissez-faire. And there are 4 paths to acculturation, and I don't know why. I think I was trying to put pictures in that kind of like represented like how different cultures are like represented, like in my opinion. So for these, I basically thought of a person that I knew for each of these. So I think this is quite a good idea to help you remember. So assimilation, so give up your home culture, embrace the dominant culture. So I have a cousin who's very much like not into like the like family culture, and she's very much into like the British culture, which is cool. And basically that's, I think of her for assimilated. So she's embraced the dominant culture, given up the home culture. Then integrated, maintain home culture, embrace dominant culture. I'd say like me, I feel like I'm a good example for that. Like I feel like I maintain some home culture, but embrace also the dominant culture. So maybe like some of you can think of examples for that. Separation is maintaining the home culture and isolating from the dominant culture. So if you think of like some patients who've been here for like 30 years and can't speak English, for example, or never want to mix with other people and only go to like, you know, their own community events, like maybe they only go to like one particular church or one particular mosque because they want to maintain their home culture and they're isolated from the dominant culture. And then marginalization is when someone gives up the home culture, so they're no longer related to their own background, but they can't relate to the dominant culture, so they find themselves in between. And I think this is like the most difficult one for people. I don't know why I put Kate in there with wearing, I think that's when she visited, I think she visited Pakistan or something. And the mnemonic is AISM, and that is to those 4 parts. High expressed emotion. So high expressed emotion is measured with the Camberwell family interview, and it relates to these 5 things: critical comments, positive remarks, emotional over-involvement, hostility, and emotional warmth. And basically, mental illness is more common in high expressed emotion families. And high expressed emotion is a cultural thing. It has been found to be a cultural thing, as well as just, you know, occurs by chance in people's families. But for example, they did a study where certain backgrounds have more high expressed emotion. And this is also related to increased risk of relapse and schizophrenia in families with high expressed emotion. Occupational classification. These are the classic 5 social class structures, but then also social class 0, which is unemployed or student. So we start from the top. So upper and middle class 1 includes higher professional. So medicine is in there. So just think of medicine as like, I don't want to say think of medicine as number 1. No, I mean, just, you know, it's easy to remember, like, you know, doctors are considered class 1. Then class 2 is like pharmacists, managers, we've got farmers in there, social workers, teachers. So think of teachers maybe. Then skilled workers and clerical workers. You got things like artists, clerks, supervisors. I feel like supervisors like in a bank or something, maybe. Intermediate skilled workers. So these are people who are semi-skilled, like farm labourers, factory workers. And then unskilled workers are things like domestic servants and casual workers. There is quite a lot of overlap, I feel, especially nowadays. Things are less separated in the way that they were before. Like, for example, the domestic servants previously maybe be not necessarily educated, and that's why they were considered, you know, class 5. And also, this isn't really relevant apart from in epidemiological sense. You know, this doesn't really hold any regard in terms of like the way people should treat each other and things like that. It's just generally currently used for collecting data, we hope. So these are the controversial studies that are commonplace in the paper A to be brought up, and they are the Willowbrook school study. So there was a school, I think it's in New York, where basically it was children with learning disability, and they were injected on purpose with hepatitis, and that's why it's a picture of liver and the injection. And this was very controversial, obviously, because they'd given children with LD hepatitis. So that was, I think they were analysing like the treatment and things, but that was obviously not a good thing to do. Then the T-RIM study was this guy called Humphreys who he went to like the men's toilets in this place where men used to hang out and engage in sexual activities, and he pretended that he was just interested in watching. And this was controversial because he basically wanted to collect data on the types of men that were involved in these activities, but he was not really telling the truth about why he was there. So that was a reason why it was controversial. And I don't know why it was called T-RIMS, because it was the loos, but anyway. And then the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. I've put a picture of an elephant there because the tusks remind me of Tuskegee. And this is the maculopapular rash that you get in syphilis. And basically people were withheld treatment and things for syphilis, and this is the reason why it was quite controversial. Stanford's prison experiment was Stanford University divided students into groups of like guards and prisoners, and they basically were meant to sort of act out what it would be like, but then they got too into it and ended up like really like psychologically hurting each other by really taking it seriously, and then they had to like terminate the study after I think it was like 6 days because people were getting really emotionally distressed, and the guards were like they weren't allowed to hit them, but they were like being quite abusive towards the other students who were acting as prisoners. A Milgram study is probably the most famous one of these, which is the one where there's a person in an electric chair, and then when they get the question wrong, the volunteers asked to give them electric shock. So they weren't actually, I think, receiving electric shocks, but the thing said that they were getting like more and more extreme, and there was like a warning on there, but they kept doing it. And that was a controversial study because it was saying that because people later, I think the volunteers who did give the shocks were then a bit like psychologically disturbed by that, but recovered soon after. And then Beach's study, I've just put that in small letters there, where he collected 20 cases of research where there was research without informed consent. So that's Beach's study. This is these are the declarations that are that come up in the exam in question. So the Declaration of Malta relates to hunger strike. The Declaration of Lisbon relates to the rights of patients. Declaration of Tokyo is against torture of prisoners and mistreatment of people in prison. The Declaration of Ottawa is about child health, and the Declaration of Helsinki is related to medical research. And Declaration of Geneva is a revised Hippocratic oath after Nazi Germany, where basically because doctors had been involved in some war crimes, basically they'd been experimenting on people who were, in the concentration camps. So they revised the Hippocratic oath because they wanted people to say that if they were physicians and doctors, then they would only do things that were beneficial to people, and not anything like experimentation on people, in those kind of situations. And that also led to the Nuremberg Code, which was related to that as well. This is the Holmes-Rahe stress scale. These are the life-changing units of certain events in life. And there are sometimes questions which ask the direct amount, or they will say like what order. So the death of a spouse is the worst thing, that's rated at 100, and second worst is divorce. then marital separation, then a jail term, then death of a close family member, personal illness. Marriage is meant to be a good thing, but it's also obviously got a life-changing effect. Being fired from work, marital reconciliation, and retirement, which is also quite can be quite difficult for people because they really change their whole lifestyle, and they feel like a sense of loss from not working in their career anymore. This is the Genovese effect. So if there's an accident, for example, bystanders are less likely to help if there are loads of other people around. If the person who caused the accident, or like the attacker, for example, is there, if they need to do something physically, like they have to go and start CPR rather than just like make a phone call, or if it seems like a dangerous situation. And they are also more likely to help if the person who's a bystander is male and if they kind of know the person, which makes sense. Double agentry is a concept where basically the psychiatrist has a conflict of interest which interferes with their ability to act in the best interest of the patient. This was made famous by this Tarasov case. You may have heard of it, which is where there was a person in California who was having therapy and saw two different therapists, and basically told the therapist, like, oh, I really want to kill this lady, and they didn't tell that lady, maybe because, I don't know, they didn't think the risk was high enough, or they didn't want to break confidentiality for whatever reason, because of their jobs as well. And then what happened was that lady got murdered, then it got taken to court, and then they said that they didn't want to say anything because of confidentiality. So then the law was changed to say that if there is a risk to the person, then there's a legal duty to any potential victims to inform them. This is the ethical theory and principles that comes up. So these are four: utilitarianism, deontological theory, virtue-based, and principlism. Utilitarianism is from Bentham and Mill, and it's basically the greatest good for the greatest number. Like NICE and like the NHS protocol and policy is utilitarian because it basically calculates the overall, like the most people that can be served by a certain thing or a treatment, and it will do that. And there are other things that come out of that. So, for example, philosophic calculus, which is how much pleasure or pain is brought about by an action, and also rule utilitarianism, which is that rules should be calculated by the overall potential to be good or bad. But in terms of relevance, I would say just remember greatest good for the greatest number for utilitarianism, and that NICE is a utilitarian, and the NHS kind of technically. Deontological is from Kant, Immanuel Kant, and he believed that morality was imposed on human beings by themselves because they're rational beings, and we basically have to be moral, and our duties are moral and rules rather than consequences. So believes in kind of the moral understandings and basis of things. Good medical practice code by the GMC is considered part of this, and also the 10 Commandments. Virtue-based ethics are the foundations of ethical characteristics of a person, and basically this is focused on how one should be developing their personal characteristics as good things, and our work is based on that, and it's associated with the concept of good, happy, flourishing life, which is called eudaimonia. Principalism is what a lot of the things that we do now are based on, in terms of like consent, confidentiality, all those kind of things. They're based on Beauchamp and Childress's four principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So in terms of actual practicality, our systems mainly use utilitarianism and principalism as foundations. The sick role is a concept introduced by Talcott Parsons, which basically is this understanding in society that if someone is ill, it's not their fault. They are exempt from what they normally have to do, and everyone has to basically be nice to them, and nobody can blame them for what's happened to them. But they must try and themselves get well, and they must cooperate with the caregivers, and they must seek help. And there's a conflict internally where the person's like, oh, I'm ill, you know, like I can benefit from this a bit. But also because they want to recover and go back to their normal life. Social class and mental disorder. So overall, lower the social class, there's more mental illness. And the ones that are more common are schizophrenia, personality disorder, major depression. Alcohol dependence is controversial because some studies that I read when I was preparing this said that, well, because basically you may have noticed that in some notes it says that alcohol is more used in higher social classes, and some notes say that it's used in more social classes. But in the research that I read, it's basically said that there's more binge drinking in lower social classes, but the frequency of drinking is higher, and usage goes across all classes. So dependence is actually quite common amongst both. Probably, though, overall speaking, it is more common in the lower social classes. Anorexia nervosa is in higher social classes, that is an exception. And the other thing is that bipolar disorder, while the person may not necessarily be high social class, but often their relatives or their family members tend to be a higher social class and tend to be educated and wealthy. And there was some kind of theory that said that bipolar disorder people with bipolar disorder, have more creativity, and this may have been an evolutionary advantage in the higher social classes. Other social constructs are the thought of social capital. So this is the glue of society. So features of social life, networks, norms, and trust that enable participants to act together more effectively to pursue shared objectives. And they basically say that the higher social classes are better at doing this because they're less fixated on things that are self involved and more into the community things. But I don't necessarily think that may be true. Social loafing is when people exert less effort to achieve a goal when they work in a group rather than work alone. So this is probably something that everyone's come across at school and things like that, where people want to just let it go in the group and other people take over. So these are some famous names and books that come up. So Thomas Sass, he wrote The Myth of Mental Illness. So he's the guy in the top left corner. And he is basically that's a very anti-psychiatry movement famous book. I have another slide on that, so we'll cover those as well. But it's good just to remember the name of the book and the person. And then we've got The Ailment, which is by Tom Main. Then there's Michael Foucault's Madness and Civilization. Then Freud wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and the Psychopathology of Everyday Life. The bottom right-hand corner is Irving Goffman, who coined the term stigma, and he wrote a book called Stigma, and I think he also wrote another couple of books like Asylum, and I will talk about that as well. Persuasion and Healing is by Jerome D. Frank. And then this very famous book by R.D. Laing is The Divided Self. Emile Durkheim wrote Le Suicide, which was about the kind of social reasons for suicide. And then The Social Origins of Depression, I think, is Harris and Brown, Brown and Harris, yeah. These are famous neo-Freudian psychologists and general theorists. So Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud, developed his own theories later based on some of Freud's work. Erik Erikson, I forgot what he did, but I will remember in a minute. Anna Freud, obviously, she did a lot of work on children. Margaret Mahler did things on children as well, and like the individuation theories, which we'll cover next week in human development. Wilfred Bion did his work on group dynamics. Donald Winnicott was famous for the Good Enough Mother. Harry Stack Sullivan, can't remember what he did. Alfred Adler, and Otto Kernberg, and John Bowlby for attachment theory. I'll put them in the chat later because I've forgotten those two. Alfred Adler Harry Sullivan and Erik Erikson, unless anyone can remember and put it on the chat. That would be great. So stigma. So this guy, Goffman, he coined the term stigma, and he also wrote books called Asylum, Stigma, and the Presentation of the Self in Everyday Life. So a stigma is any attribute that marks an individual as being unacceptably different from normal people, and that elicits some kind of form of community sanction. And the two types are discredited, which is visible, like say somebody's race or ethnic group or what they wear, and then discreditable are things like HIV or like mental illness, which may not be visible. Felt stigma is the shame that is experienced by the person that prevents them from seeking help. And then enacted stigma is what they actually experience from other people. Say someone is like racist to them. Courtesy is the effect on those who are associated with a stigmatized person. So say, for example, in a marriage, like if someone marries someone from a different background, the stigma that they may then experience. Lincoln Felon's model of stigma. So they've just got some of these terminologies here, which sometimes are relevant. So labeling. These are personal characteristics that mark a person as different. Stereotyping, which is linking labeled characteristics to undesirable characteristics. So saying like all people who wear hoodies are thugs. Separating, which is like separating labeled group and normal group by viewing them as different. So not treating them equally. Then status loss and discrimination, which is excluding or treating the labeled group poorly. So yeah, not giving them job opportunities, for example, or not serving people in a restaurant. And then these are the people that I mentioned before, who were the anti-psychiatry. So Thomas Sass, Ardy Leng, Michael Foucault, and Franco Basaglia. They all wrote things that were foundations of the anti-psychiatry movement. So it's just worth remembering those names, Sass, Leng, Foucault, and Basaglia, because they sometimes are asked. And mental illness, they believe that mental illness is a social construct, and maybe evolutionarily relevant and not necessarily something that we should be treating. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to, so that's all of the things that we were going to cover today. I'm just going to look at the notes for those people whose books I forgot, so that I can just tell you. So I'll just do that. And in the meantime, I can open up the chat for any questions. So please feel free to send your questions through, and I will have a look at them in a second. Okay. So I'll just come to those questions in a second, but we'll go through those people again. So Alfred Adler, his belief was that the main driving force in personality was a striving for superiority. That's one of his key concepts. So Carl Jung, we know, he introduced things like the persona and the shadow and the archetypes, which are kind of the personality related theories. Erik Erikson was, he's known for his stages of psychosocial development. Harry Sullivan was credited with interpersonal therapy. Wilfred Bion, we know about the group dynamics. John Bourne, we all know that attachment theory. Anna Freud, she developed defense mechanisms. Otto Kernberg developed transference-focused psychotherapy, which was useful for patients with borderline personality disorder. And then Margaret Mahler had her theories on child development with the three phases: autistic phase, symbiotic phase, and the separation individuation phase. And then Don Winnicott, we know, he introduced the concept of the transitional object and the good enough mother. So that is the people that unfortunately their theories didn't stick. So that's those. Yeah, so just coming up to covering pretty much everything. We have covered a lot, and I went through everything really fast, which a couple of people have said. And yes, I did go through everything really fast, but that is because I wanted to cover everything. As said before, I did get 85% on this topic, pretty much covering all of that stuff. I know there's more stuff out there, but this is all the stuff that I studied and learned quite well. So if that, makes anyone feel more confident in learning the material, um, and yeah, I would suggest that you go. I use MRC Psych Mentor. I would suggest going through just all of the questions on that topic. Maybe this week, but before next week's session. There's about 319 questions on this topic on MRC Psych Mentor, and then maybe suggest watching the replay if you want to. Make any notes or just go through any particular subjects again. There's a couple of things that I didn't think I would have time to cover, and that's sleep disorders, heuristics, and confidentiality laws. The sleep disorders are quite straightforward just to go through and to learn. They're not dissimilar from the medical school level material that we've covered in the past. Heuristics are things like framing effect, and then confidentiality laws are just like the GMC's rules on things like when to break confidentiality and like GMC good practice and professional standards of a doctor. But apart from that, that is pretty much everything in the first part of the syllabus that is covered. So I will answer some of these questions, and then yeah, if there's any other comments and things, then we can discuss those too. So first question, I want to go back to the slide on memory. I thought that would happen. Where is it? Okay, yeah, so here you go. This is the slide on memory that people wanted to have a look at again. Yeah, as said, so going back to long-term memory, how that's stored, so the declarative memory, as said before, that's something that you declare, so you know it. So your episodic memory is your memory of yourself, things that have happened in your life, and the semantic memory is the memory that you have of facts and knowledge about the world or things you've studied, and that is the explicit memory. So that's in your long-term memory. And then the non-declarative are the things, so implicit memory, like procedures like riding a bike, driving a car, making a cup of tea, for example. Associative memory of things like are related to other things, non-associative memory, and priming. So I'll go to those slides, that will help. Yeah, so really learn behavior through repeated exposure to an isolated stimulus, and then exposure influences response later. So use the example of Darren Brown, for example, because sometimes he will prime people by showing them a word or something, and then that will influence later their answer that they might give. So that, I hope that answers the question. And yeah, the rest of the things, so sensory memory is kind of like it's not part of your short term, it's your sensory memory. It is different, but it does go into that does go into the working memory to be processed before going over to short term and then to long term if it's encoded for long term. And then section. Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about a bit more about the Gestalt laws. So the question is about how the question will be asked in the paper about these laws. I've never seen actually them put a picture, but it doesn't mean to say that they can't. I mean, they could put pictures of things and say, what is this? But so far, the ones that I've seen have been just like, which one of these is a Gestalt law of perceptual organization, or which one of these is not, and then just remembering the names of the thing, so SSPP, CCC, to remember your laws. And if you just put in Google Images Gestalt laws, you can see there's 6 of them, and they're just kind of quite similar shapes, like being grouped together, or like the way that things look. For example, in Common Fate, there's like, if you have a picture and there's like loads of fish pointing in one direction and one fish is pointing the other way, you still kind of perceive the whole thing as a collective element of facing one direction. So yeah, I mean, there is a possibility they could put pictures in, so it might be worthwhile, but I kind of just had a general idea of what they were like. I didn't like learn them in that much detail. Then the next question, up to theories of emotion. Yeah, so just wanted me to talk about that bit again. So yeah, so these are the 4 theories, and these are just the way that I memorize them. So a dog called James, which is that this dog called James comes up to you and your body responds and then your mind interprets that as fear. So that's the James Langer theory. Then the cannon bard, picture of a cannon, because it happens all at the same time, like a cannon going off, like boom. And then you have your emotion at the same time as your physiological response. Then Singer-Schlachter, the way I remembered it was because you're singing, because you're happy, because your heart is racing, and you can either label that as fear based on the context, like you're about to jump off a plane, or happiness because your heart is racing because you're having such a good time, singing at your wedding or your friend's wedding or something. So your mind is appraising that, and that's the Singer-Schlachter theory, which is that the emotions result from the physiological change, which is heart racing, for example, and the context. And then the Lazarus theory, this is a bit of a loose connection, but Lazarus was known as the person who was raised from the dead. So he's like come up first, like he's died and then he's come back, and basically you have to have the thought first before the emotion. So if you see a dog or a snake or a spider, then you have to imagine, the theory is that you imagine that it's going to bite you or something's going to happen to you, and then you feel afraid. So the stimulus from the emotion arises from the thought of being hurt, rather than anything else. You actually have to think of some kind of horrible thing for it to be causing the emotion. So those are the theories of emotion. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, good. And then, okay, what's the question? Yeah, so question on the aggression theories. I think just kind of like understanding maybe the key differences that I've mentioned before will probably be enough. I don't think you need to, learn more other theories than this. There are other theories, obviously, like with anything. But I think if this is like the amount that you know about the theories, that is probably sufficient. That's all I kind of knew, really, and actually probably less than this, because like you can't always remember the detail. So I guess Lorenz is quite important, and Freud's theory. The other ones, like, they kind of make sense a bit more, like Berkowitz theories of adverse conditions, and the social learning theory is relevant to so many different other psychological theories that, it's hard to, social learning theory applies to everything that people observe other people doing something and they learn it because of the social situation, they learn it from other people, from example. So that is something which is well established anyway. Did that answer the question? Okay, cool. And then I wanted to... Yeah, so as I said, I just imagine people that fit these kind of stereotypes, I guess, to try and remember them. But yeah, these are the four paths to acculturation, and I suppose what examples they might give is like somebody who's emigrated and has stopped doing like what they normally stop eating what they would normally eat in their home country and have moved here or moved somewhere else and have changed their culture, and how there are different levels of these things, and the ideal one that they would want to that has been shown for like best like mental health things is probably integration because of its ability to maintain the role within like a family and the society and community, but also be part of a wider group, which promotes a kind of acceptance and feelings of value within society. And then someone wanted to see the that one is, yeah, this is just quite a lot of words really, but in essence, yeah, I said the utilitarianism, you want that to be greatest good for the greatest number. Bentham and Mill are the names that we would learn for that part. Deontological is by Kant and is related to moral duties and rules. And then virtue ethics are about the ethical characteristics of a person. Principalism is what we have always used kind of within like medical school interviews and theories. This is the construct that they like to ask questions about: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And then I think pretty much everyone knows about that, unless anyone wants me to go through those. I will probably not go through them because I think most people know what they are. Let me just see anything else. Yeah. Okay, someone wants to see this slide again. Yeah, I mean, I just put them because sometimes just remembering what an image looks like can just trigger your mind to remember some of these names. It can be really hard to remember all of the names again. I just used flashcards for them, and then just got someone to test me. So maybe sometime this week that could be something that you do. Put together some flashcards, or just create like a checklist of names from the first section of the syllabus. That there are going to be more people's names coming up later for other theories, so it's worth just kind of getting to know these ones first before adding some more. It can get very, very confusing. There's so many. I don't really know if all of them are that relevant, because I mean, at the very least, it does say like people related to the anti-psychiatry movement, for example, and obviously like Freud and Jung and things. They're all essentials, but again, it's rote learning. It can be easy marks if you have time to learn those things. But I'd be interested to know what you guys found. Those of you who've done the exam before will have got their breakdown. If you want to share that with me, or like private chat that to me, so that I can see what areas of focus like need more work, like I'm happy to have a look at that, because I know some people find like the social science stuff really heavy and dry, and difficult to learn, but these names and things are quite good marks to get. And then as I said before, these are the famous Neurofreudians that we already went through. I hope that answers that question. And oh, missed it. Yeah, the frontal lobe tests. Yeah, I definitely think like I watched videos on these. Like it probably took like half an hour, just to see what they were like. Someone's asked another question as well. I'll come to that one. Thank you. Yeah, so these are just like the frontal lobe test, and these are the roles of the frontal lobe. So I couldn't think of any easy way to remember these, any mnemonics. If anyone comes up with something, then do share it with the group, or share it with me. I can share it with the group. But yeah, I'll go back to the Freudian slide. Yeah, I mentioned earlier each person did what. I can go through those again if you like. I mean, it will be on the replay, but I can just do it quickly. So Alfred Adler, he believed that the main driving force in personality is a striving for superiority. Then we've got Carl Jung, who was obviously like Freud's student and developed his own theories based on Freud's theories, developed the persona, the shadow self, talked about the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, talked about archetypes like the anima, animus, shadow, and the self. Then Erik Erikson was known for his stages of psychosocial development, which we'll cover in human development next week. Harry Stack Sullivan was credited with the introduction of interpersonal therapy. Wilfred Bion, he did group dynamics, as we said before, the basic assumption groups of dependency, fight, flight, and pairing, and then also working groups, which work well. Then John Bowlby's got obviously attachment theory. Then Anna Freud did the defense mechanisms. Otto Kernberg did transference-focused psychotherapy, which is useful for borderline patients. And then Margaret Mahler did child development theories, again, which we'll cover in human development. And Donald Winnicott introduced the concept of the transitional object and the good enough mother. I hope that covers that question. So someone asked when I say share it with the group, do you mean on the webinar on a WhatsApp group? I mean on the webinar group, so I can send out an email to everyone who's part of this group, if needed, if anyone wants to share anything or any particular resources. There isn't a WhatsApp group. Okay. So I think that is. I haven't got any more questions, so all those questions are covered. Unless anybody has any more questions, I'll be around till 4:30. If anyone wants to ask me anything, but obviously feel free to go. And the recording will be sent out later today, like maybe in like 45 minutes or so. So that you can have access to that if you need to. But otherwise, I hope that was useful for you. at the same time again next week on Sunday at 2:00. We'll go through human development. The same kind of structure. I'll go through everything really fast, just to make sure that we've covered everything that's important on the syllabus. Again, supplement that later yourselves with the questions, and hopefully, we're going through everything. Should be able to maximize getting the marks on all of those things. So yeah, as I said, please feel free to go if you need to go. Otherwise, I will be here to take any more questions or to give any other advice generally on the exam. I'm happy to help with that. Okay, so I'll go back to the end slide. You're welcome. Oh yeah, I can just go through the components of language. That's fine. Right. So components of the language these are the ones that are listed in like the textbook, but then when you look online at other models of language, so there's semantics, which is the meaning, the syntax, which is the sentence structure, morphology, which is the word structure, phonology, the organization of speech sound, and then phonetics, which is the production, transmission, and perception of speech. And then the pragmatics is like the understanding of the sentence themselves. Yeah, I think the language is covered a bit more later in, like the aphasias, and looking at how that is structured. That gives a bit more flavour to how language works, really. But I hope that is there any particular thing. The next slide, yeah, sure. The next slide is other theories, just other relevant theories. Do you want me to go through that one again? Okay, so incentive salience was basically you can want something but not like it, and that's because of it just being like a chemical desire almost, like it's mediated by the dopamine system. Like for example, like drug use, you may not really like it actually, but the feeling is something that you want. Or even people like in toxic relationships, those kind of feelings that people get, maybe something they don't like, but it kind of causes like a dopamine surge. Other things like sugary things, you may not actually you want to eat it for the sugar, but you may not actually like that thing. And then the state dependent amplification of incentive salience is basically that once you've kind of got into a state where the dopamine starts to flow, you then are more likely to then do more of that thing. Like people, like if they have one drink, then they may just like start having loads. Or again, like once they've had one hit of the drug, they may then be like, oh, whatever, I'll just have loads more, because they're then wanting it, like from a biochemical perspective, almost like the dopamine hit is then something that they want, craving even more. So there's like a state dependent, and also there's theories similar to that on incentive salience of grief. So there is like a model which says that grief has a similar method, in like a kind of cognitive sort of model. And then the diathesis stress model is just saying that both nature and nurture contribute to a person's behavior, in that basically that the predisposition, which may be genetic, towards a certain illness is present in everyone, but then that may be like triggered by environmental stress in those people, and that's what causes a mental illness. And then intervention causation fallacy, just saying that a cure doesn't mean that there is a cause, which is the same for all medicine, really. That, if somebody, I mean, kind of, I suppose, but, for example, if you give someone antibiotics and they recover, doesn't necessarily mean that there was definitely an infection. They may have had viral illness that would have recovered anyway. But you never know. Maybe it was an antibiotic that worked. But this in this example that is used for the paper A. I guess they're kind of focusing more on things like antidepressants, saying that if you give someone an antidepressant and they get better in their mood, doesn't necessarily mean that they were depressed before. But I disagree with this. I feel like it's quite a good measure of seeing if the treatment is effective or not. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. And yeah, sorry I went through everything so fast because I thought that I was going to run out of time, but I actually had a bit of time at the end. Oh, you're welcome. Cool. So that's fine. So we've just got about just under 10 minutes left if there's any other questions. Thank you very much for your support, guys. Yeah, I just really I'm here for you, like throughout the next sort of few weeks, like whatever things that you might want to focus in on, or like kind of get some support with. Just feel free to drop me like a line if there's anything you want to focus on in some of the next sessions. Human development is, I will probably say all of this again in the next session, but it's a really, really good topic because it's the shortest one, but it carries equal weight to this topic as well as classification. So again, that's a whole bunch of marks that can be got to help, increase the chances of passing. And yeah, there's a very reasonable amount of information in human development which just have to learn, and that will really help kind of get you through this time. I mean, it's very, very hard when you've worked really hard for an exam and then you don't get through. And especially for us, I feel like as medics, it's like we are not used to failing anything, and like having to spend so much money on things, having such little support from anywhere really, apart from just buying buying things online. I really want to kind of change that focus and make it something that is achievable and not like something that we dread, and something that we can do together as well. So yeah, do feel free just to um, mention if there's anything in particular that people are struggling with that they found consistently from sitting the exam once or twice before, that they've found themselves losing marks on. We can always, spend a bit more time on those things. I think maybe in this session and next session, there might be like more time for questions because the content is less than some of the other ones like neurosciences and the psychopharmacology. But yes, if there's anything in particular that you want me to go through or me to cover with you, then let me know and I'll have time to prepare that in advance. And yeah, just feel free to, if there's any resources you want to share as well with other people, then yeah, let me know and I can send something out. Okay. Okay, guys, thanks for coming. I think most people have finished with their questions and things now. So I'm going to close the webinar. You'll get the replay sent by email. And same time again, 2 p.m. next Sunday, we'll go through human development. And I'll see you guys then. So take care.